Monday, as I pulled into the garage, I noticed a puddle of oil on the driveway. I knew my car didn't have leaked, so I looked under my wife's car. Nothing. I cleaned it up, went inside and kissed my wife. Betty, hello? She was busy getting dinner ready. I asked her if she knew that someone parked in our driveway. She looked a little startled and said no. Why? I told her about the oil spot on the driveway. Since our cars didn't have a leak, someone parked there. She said she didn't know anything about it. She was very late getting home and was concentrating on getting dinner going. I said, well, maybe one of the neighbors is having an affair and is parking in our driveway to stay out of sight. Betty got the funniest look on her face. I said, I'm just joking. It's no big deal. I cleaned it up. Then I walked out the front door to the street and got the mail and newspaper. I looked Tuesday, nothing. Wednesday, nothing. And Thursday, nothing. I decided not to worry about it anymore. I came in and kissed Betty hello, then went to get the mail and newspaper. There it was, a puddle of oil at the curb. It looked just like the one that was on the driveway. This was strange. I just cleaned it up and didn't say anything to Betty. I started thinking she was startled when I asked her about it Monday, and she got very flustered when I made the joke about a neighbor having an affair. If you're enjoying my content, consider joining my Patreon community. By becoming a patron, you'll get access to full parts of my videos much earlier than everyone else. Plus, you'll be supporting me to create even more awesome content for you. Check out the link in the description to join now. I had no reason to think she was doing anything wrong, but I wondered. My name is Dan, and Betty and I have been married for 30 years, and we both just turned 50. We have 2 kids, both married. Betty's a teacher's aide at a private church school. She started when our kids were in preschool. She was able to have the same hours and holidays as them, so it worked out well. It kept her busy and brought in some extra money. She really loves her job and still works there. She's almost always home by 4 p.m., which gives her time to cook, work around the house, or run errands before I get home. I don't usually get home until about 6:30 p.m. I call her when I leave work so she can have dinner ready and we can eat together when I get home. There seemed to be a pattern, if 2 events made a pattern. Who was coming to our house on Monday and Thursday afternoons? I couldn't believe Betty would be having an affair. Our life was okay, I guess. After the kids got out of the house, I hoped it would pick up, but it didn't. She has seemed distant the last several weeks. But she's always like that at the beginning of the school year. We hadn't made love in almost a month and were definitely overdue. I was going to insist on it this weekend. Friday night after we showered, Betty headed for bed. I followed and started kissing and fondling her. She shut me down immediately. She said she was too tired from work and didn't feel like it. She turned her back and didn't say another word. Not, I'm sorry, maybe tomorrow when I'm rested. Not, let's just cuddle tonight. Nothing, just complete rejection. I was pissed, got out of bed, went into the den and turned on the TV. Saturday, I was basically in a foul mood. She didn't mention last night and acted like nothing was wrong. She had to see that I was upset, but she ignored it. When we went to bed, I tried again and was met with the same cold rejection. I said, Betty, what's going on? We haven't made love in almost a month, and twice you instantly rejected me. Betty was mad. She shouted, can't you see I'm tired? The first weeks of school are hard and I'm under a lot of stress. I simply don't have the energy or frankly the desire to deal with your urges. I'll let you know when I want it with you. Until then, back OFF, or it'll be a very long time before we have it again, if ever. She had never spoken to me like that. I was deeply hurt and dumbfounded. I got out of bed and slept on the couch. We avoided each other Sunday, and when I went to bed, I stayed on my side of the bed. Monday, I decided to leave work early to see who had the oil leak. I intended to get there before Betty got home, but there was an accident on the freeway and I didn't get home until about 5:15 p.m. I hoped I hadn't missed whoever it was. We live on a cul-de-sac that backs up to a neighborhood park. I parked there and sat on one of the benches where I had a good view of my house. I even brought my binoculars for a better view. There was a white Explorer parked in front of the house. At 5:30 p.m., a man and woman came out. I recognized them. It was Helen and Steve. They work with Betty at the school. When they left, I got in my car and drove down my street. I called Betty on my cell and said, Hi Betty, I got off a little early. I was about to call you when Ed called me. You know how hard he is to stop once he gets going. We talked the whole way home. I finally told him I was almost home and he let me go. I'm pulling in front of the house now. Bye. I bet that threw her into a tizzy. As I passed my house, I saw another oil spot. I walked in as she was coming down the stairs. She started in on me. I wish she would have called. I got home late and haven't even thought about dinner. I said, that's okay. We'll just go out. Let me put my briefcase away and clean up. I went to our bedroom and nothing seemed out of place. I came out and she was in the laundry room. I told her I was going upstairs to the study to turn on the computer, that I needed to start downloading a large file while we went to eat. I turned on the computer and went to check the kids' old bedrooms. They were undisturbed. Then, I went to the guest bedroom and it was locked. I didn't even know it could be locked, let alone knew where the key was. She yelled, asking where I was, so I went downstairs. At the restaurant, I acted like nothing was wrong. When we got home, I went and showered. Then, I went upstairs and checked the guest bedroom again. The door was unlocked and everything was in order. Something was going on. Tuesday, I decided I had to see what was going on inside the house. It seemed the activity took place in the guest room. At lunchtime, I went to a security store and bought a wireless webcam. After Betty went to bed, I installed it in the guest room. I hid it in the bookcase, making sure the whole room would be visible. I loaded the software and started it up. It was motion activated and worked great. I could clearly see the whole room. All I had to do was wait for Thursday. Thursday, I called Betty at 6 p.m. and told her all hell broke loose at work. I said I would be very late and not to wait up for me. She wouldn't have anyway. Nothing was wrong at work. I just didn't want to go home until she was asleep. I got in about 11 p.m. and stuck my head in the bedroom and told her I was home. She just grunted okay. I went to the study and started the playback. As the door opened, I could hear talking and laughter. They came in and started hugging and kissing each other. Betty and Helen got undressed and began undressing Steve. All the time they were caressing his body. They took turns. Betty started, and little by little, Helen took over and did the same thing. They switched again. When he was drained, she leaned over to Helen. What she did next floored me. Betty and Helen open-mouth kissed. I had never seen anything like that before, not even in the P videos I occasionally watched. They rested a few minutes and Betty went downstairs and got them all drinks. They talked for a few minutes and Betty started Steve's, bringing it back to life. Everyone was enjoying themselves. Betty then told Helen, "It's my turn to F him first. You were first Monday." After a few minutes they got up and started dressing. Steve said, "Remember ladies, don't let your husbands have any of your. Keep them cut off." They both laughed and Betty proudly said, "I meant to tell you that I had to get a little forceful with Dan last weekend. He kept trying to get me to have it with him. I finally told him I was too tired and had no desire to have it with him. I told him I would let him know when I wanted to F him, and until then, to back off, or it would be a very long time before he saw this again." Helen and Steve laughed hysterically. Steve said, "I can't believe your husband is such a wimp. You turned him into a first-rate C." They all laughed, but for some reason, Betty didn't seem to think it was quite so funny anymore. Then Steve said, "I know what you've got to do. This'll be great. You have to let him eat your with my C. That will make him the ultimate C." Helen said, "Betty, that would be great." Betty said, "I don't know. How could I do that, even if I wanted to?" Steve said, "Easy. When he comes home, tell him you're sorry about the way you treated him the weekend. Tell him you want to make love to him right now. Both of you get undressed. After the thing, tell him that was great. Then get up, get dressed, and tell him you're going to start dinner. He will be totally frustrated." He and Helen were laughing so hard that there were tears in their eyes. Betty looked sick and said, "Don't you think Dan will say something?" Steve said, "So, what if he does? Tell him you are satisfied and that's all you care about. He'll be pissed and sulk. But what can he do? He's just a C." Helen said, "You've got to do this when he gets home tonight." Steve and Helen were loving this. Betty didn't say anything. Helen and Steve left, and after a few minutes, Betty came back in the bedroom and started to clean up. When she was through, it looked like nothing had happened. Betty sat down on the bed and stared into space, shaking her head, and began to cry. The phone rang. She composed herself, closed the door, and went to answer it. It was me, telling her I would be late. I turned off the computer and just sat there. She hurt me worse than anyone in my life had hurt me. I didn't know this woman. My life had just crumbled before my eyes. On Friday, work was almost impossible. I kept playing it over in my mind. I kept asking myself why, but got no answer. There was no question I was going to confront her, but how? Finally, I decided to confront all of them Monday afternoon. I would come home early and walk in as soon as they arrived. I didn't want to see them again. I just couldn't handle it. Saturday and Sunday were difficult. It was hard to behave like nothing was wrong. Betty was very subdued. We avoided each other as best we could, and thankfully the weekend ended. Monday, I left work early and went to the park to wait. I had been going over this in my mind, and I hoped I was ready. Finally, I saw Steve's Explorer pull to the curb, and he and Helen got out and went in. I immediately headed for my house. Before I even got to the door, I could hear arguing from inside. Betty kept saying she couldn't do it anymore, and Helen and Steve were telling her she could. I opened the door and walked right in. I called out, "Hi, honey." I took off early and "Oh, I see you have guests." When Betty saw me, her face turned completely white. Betty said, "Dan, what are you doing home so early?" I ignored her and said, "Hi, Helen." Then I said, "Steve, I'm Dan, Betty's husband. You probably don't remember, but we met at the potluck dinner at the beginning of school. What brings you all here? Is this a social visit, or are you working on something for school?" Steve jumped in and said, "Yes, we have to give a presentation to the principal, and we're going to work on it." I said, "Well, it was nice to see all of you again. I'll go up to the study and let you get back to work." They just smiled as I went upstairs. In the study, I pulled out 3 folders, one for each of them. Inside were pictures and a DVD of Monday's activities. After a couple of minutes, I went back downstairs. They didn't seem to be getting much done on their project. I said, "You know, I've given hundreds of presentations, and I've learned that the key to success is pictures. You can convey more with a picture than you can ever say." I handed each of them a folder and said, "You might find this interesting." They looked at each other, not knowing what to do. Finally, they opened their folders and pulled out the pictures. They all gasped and their faces turned pale. Betty and Helen started crying and Steve started cussing. I said, "You can check out the DVD at your leisure." Betty started saying she was sorry. I told her to shut the F up. Steve asked what I was going to do. I said, "Here's what's going to happen. We're going to have a little cocktail party here Saturday at 7 p.m., and you're going to bring your spouses. I don't care how you get them here, but you better. Then, you're going to give your presentation, explaining what you did and why." Steve said, "There's no way I'm doing that." Helen said, "I can't." Betty didn't say anything. I said, "Sure you can and you will. If you don't, I'll just have to give a copy of your presentation to the principal. I'm sure he would be interested in the behavior of 3 of his teachers. You know, the ones who are molding the minds and morals of the children." Steve said, "You bastard." I said, "Technically, I'm not a bastard. I may be a wimp in a C, but not a bastard. And this C will have the last laugh. I don't care how you do it, but there will be a presentation Saturday night. You and Helen get the F out of my house, and except for Saturday, you better never come back." They walked out the door and down the walk. Before Steve got to his car, I yelled, "Hey, Steve." He turned around and I said, "You really need to get that oil leak fixed." Then I slammed the door. I went back into the den and Betty was still sitting there. She saw me and said, "Dan, I'm so sorry. I can't even begin to explain what you saw." I said, "Save it. Don't even try. You can explain it in your presentation. Until then, I don't want to talk to you. I'm sleeping an hour." "No, my bed. You can sleep in the guest bed. You should be pretty used to it by now. I hope you changed the sheets." She started crying, but I didn't care. To be continued.